Hero was a teenage Rowan, and like the Nimiki, they decided not to join the Cinderella Confederation. It was mostly due to the fact they couldn't hope to afford the fees. Wanderil was a rather poor planet, as far as planets went, and the Rowan space program barely had any legs. Rowan were a charming race, as far as the children of the stars went, and shared a lot of genetic markers with the Prill. They were thankfully different in both temperament, culture, and look from the Prill, and this meant that human smugglers were far more eager to trade with them. Rowan had the long, wide ears off the side of the head like the Prill, but they had full heads of hair. Their hair was long, curly, and vibrantly colored, while their skin was shades of yellow, ranging from light buttermilk to a dusky gold. Humans who came upon the Rowan called them adorable and cute, and their pictures were spread far and wide on Earth. The first human smugglers came upon a small town of Rowan that all had dark brown hair, and dubbed them banana people in early reports. They realized later on that there were far more colors to their hair, but the moniker stuck. This gave birth to the Nanner Run, a smuggler path that ran to the world of Wanderil. The sudden interest in the Rowan by humans caused their leadership to panic, and they banned humans from ever going to their world for recreational visits, only allowing the smugglers due to their length of contact and trust. There was a deep-seated fear that the humans at large would steal the Rowan from their planet or force them into their army. The Rowan had been reading deeply into Yorpal reports, as well as interactions between humanity and the Zumra, and they knew they stood no chance in comparison. So, humans could only land on Wanderil if they were smugglers associated with 5 key syndicates, and even then, they could only visit and operate within certain locations, far and away from general Rowan society. The Rowan who worked with the humans quickly proved why leadership was correct to fear humanity. They wanted to leave and see the stars with humans, as well as see Earth and its many space stations being bought in wholesale by the stories and charismatic nature of humans. Rowan security forces always searched human ships top to bottom, making sure that no rogue Rowan were hiding away on board. Some got away, the more cunning of the Rowan, but others had to settle for more mundane means to meet humans. This came in the form of taverns and trolls. Video games were nothing new, as even the Nimiki had little simulators to whittle away their free time on, but no one did video games like the humans. Taverns and Trolls was a GWRPG, or a galaxy-wide role-playing game, set within a fantastical world of human creation. The younger Rowan were instantly enamored with the game, which oddly enough matched well with their more rustic aesthetic. Human smugglers always remarked that visiting Wanderil was like stepping back in time, even though they had spaceships. Harrow was deep into the addiction of taverns and trolls, and was a prized healer in a large guild primarily made up of humans. The Gigachads were the top guild on Harrow's server of multiple planets, and the constant challenges and missions set out daily by human support staff always kept the game fresh. Then there was the artificial intelligence, known as Big Mork, which further made the game truly feel alive. Harrow, aka Big Bungus Chungus, the wood elf healer, was prized for his skill at micro and macro managing both himself and the other healers within the guild. This went as far as Harrow being able to make Earth credits, being paid to heal or go on loan to other guilds. This allowed Harrow to be mildly successful on his own poorer planet, and allowed him to play the game full-time as a job. He loved it, as one would when you could go to work in your pajamas. Harrow and his planet were far away from the Mandarin conflict and did not pay it much mind, as they still attempted to earn their own way into the stars. The Rowan may have been poor, but they were quite proud for a race. A new alert had buzzed his communications array, and all his human guildmates were braying for him to come online and heal. They were to be facing an invasion wave, attempting to hold back the tide of undead flooding toward the new player areas. Death was permanent in taverns and trolls, which meant that a lot of people just starting out were going to be kicked back to the beginning of the grind again. Harrow logged on with a smirk, ready to strut his stuff again, and already the credits were flowing in from other guilds bidding on him. Of course, he would help his guild first. then go off to earn the next 6 months' rent in only a few hours. The first hour of play went well, even if the ASGDD was getting sweaty around his face and made his ears a little sore. The BCI headset was not designed for Rowan physicality, but Harrow made do.
"Good work out there, Banana Man,"
one of the players said, and Harrow turned his head, looking at the face of their dwarf warrior.
"Thanks, Fallen,"
Harrow replied, glowing under the hum and cast of light from the ASGDD headset.
"I always enjoy these little wave missions. They're a nice change of pace."
"Did that headset and gear make it to you? Had to pay that smuggler and all kinds of weird shit so he'd take it,"
another guild member said.
"What is it with you, Rowan, and peanut butter cups?"
Harrow's fingers, already halfway through peeling a cup free, paused.
Peanut butter is good?"
"He's got you there, Shank,"
Fallen laughed out.
"Peanut butter do be good."
Harrow was laughing along with his guildmates when a new alert buzzed on his communications array, and he brought a small display around so he could look at it while slightly raising his headset. Harrow swallowed hard as the letters traced across the display, and he felt his skin go cold as he spoke.
"Hey, guys, I got a problem here."
"What? More guilds trying to poach you?"
their guild leader asked, the clinking of alchemy bottles a near constant chorus around him.
No,
Harrow said, and suddenly 30 more alerts buzzed on his array.
I think we're being raided."
"I can't just call the military, John, are you stupid?" Jessalyn shouted to her son, who had come nearly rolling down the stairs shouting to her to call the army. "What do I even need to call them for?" John, sporting a freshly rolled ankle, hobbled to the kitchen.
"You don't understand, Mom. The Mandarin are raiding Wanderil. They're going to kill our guild healer."
"What the hell is a Wanderil?" Jessalyn asked, cracking the cap off a bottle of beer. John, clearly in a panic, slapped his palms against the countertop.
"The Rowan, Mom! The Rowan! Harrow is a Rowan!"
"Ooh, your little banana friend?" Jessalyn said, taking a sip of her bottle. "How is he doing?"
"He's being raided, Mom! God!"
John wailed, panic gripping him as his mother was, as usual, not treating him seriously.
"You have to call the army and let them know. Only adults can use the hotline. Harrow is like a brother to all of us, and he carries the entire guild."
Jessalyn rolled her eyes, taking another swig from her bottle before setting it down. "The hotline incurs a heavy penalty when you use it incorrectly, which you would know since you have already made a call in about the Mandarin ship you saw in your telescope. Remember that ship? The ship that turned out to just be a damn rock?"
"This is different. Harrow asked us all directly. All the other moms are calling in too. Mom, please, just call it. I'll pay it off like last time, I promise."
John pleaded, gripping the edge of the countertop.
"We can't lose Harrow. He'll die there, Mom. They don't have actual soldiers that can handle the Mandarin."
"If you're being stupid again, I'm taking the money out of your college fund." Jessalyn sighed, but pulled up the house data slate, keying in the number. "All right. What's going on exactly?"
"Admiral,"
Colonel Shakes said, turning around to look at the naval commander, just as they were just breaking for lunch.
"Are you getting these?"
Admiral Vincent turned back to look at the Army colonel, holding up his slate.
"I am, actually. An SOS signal being sent down from Earth, but it's correlating to some event on Wanderil."
"Ah, the Rowan,"
Colonel Shakes said, itching at his cheek.
"I believe they are not part of the Cinderella Confederation."
"Why?"
"Too poor."
"Ah." Admiral Vincent opened up the alerts.
"Well, either way, we can't go down there unless we have an invitation. We were all having a good chuckle about it when the ruling came down. We're like the Fae of the Stars now." "You mean the doorbell ruling?"
Colonel Shakes asked, opening up a few of the messages at a time.
"The very same. We can't break Atmo without a formulated and solid invitation by the Rowan,"
Admiral Vincent said, though his face soured as the video began to play. It was a bunch of digital characters dressed in fantasy armor, and it appeared to be in a game. One character, a wood elf, was begging and pleading for the others to help them. And Admiral Vincent could hear the bark of an orbital displacement drop breaking atmosphere in the background of the mic.
"They'll be slaughtered,"
Colonel Shake said with a twitch of his head.
"The Rowan are severely lacking in war power. Their largest ships couldn't even handle our patrol cruisers."
Admiral Vincent nodded, but a few choice words were screeched out by the wolf elf, and he drew in a deep breath.
"The accent does indeed sound like a Rowan."
"Admiral," Colonel Shake said cautiously, turning on a heel to hit the man with a look.
"This is shaky in the legal sense. We can't prove the elf is a Rowan. But all these other players are obviously human,"
Admiral Vincent said, tapping the side of his thumb against his data slate.
"And if no one acts, the Mandarin will kill the Rowan to the last. We both know this. The war wave is about to make bootfall in only a few hours."
Colonel Shakes pressed his lips together, weighing the options as he spoke.
"We'll be going way off our patrol path, and we have 4 destroyers docked on us. We need to know for sure the planet is under heavy assault. The Confederation Council will be quite peeved if we go in and rescue someone not under their fold, and it turns out just to be a small raiding party. Does anyone on this boat play taverns and trolls?"
Admiral Vincent asked, and the bark of a laugh from Colonel Shakes told him he knew someone who did.
"All right, Chungus, you're on with the Admiral,"
Sergeant Taskins of the 7th Infantry said into his mic, then twisted the headset towards the Admiral so he could speak.
"Mr. Chungus?"
Admiral Vincent asked, ringed with nearly 100 troopers packed into the coffee shop on board the Big Mouth Bass.
"I understand you are under attack?"
Harrow looked out the nearby window and saw the flashes in the distance.
"We are. I counted 20 ships breaking atmosphere. There's a whole bunch of shooting and explosions."
"Are there any larger ships?"
Admiral Vincent asked patiently.
"Do you have a telescope nearby?"
"I do."
Harrow rushed out, then slowly crawled towards his window. He had seen several fast attack craft zip by his expensive residential building, and he could hear the armed guards down below shooting into the air. Admiral Vincent turned to Colonel Shakes.
"He speaks English well for a Rowan."
"They learn English faster on this game than anything else, sir,"
Sergeant Taskins said with a shrug. Harrow pulled his microscope around, chose the correct filters, then set it to scan automatically. The gears and motors whirred and buzzed as it tracked, then stopped with a cheerful beep. Harrow put his eye to the viewport, and lounging above the sky was an honest-to-heavens Mandarin world hewer.
"World hewer,"
Harrow hissed into the microphone of his headset.
"It's a world hewer. I know them from the alert pictures."
"They're going to scour the planet,"
Colonel Shake said in alarm, and even Admiral Vincent had to lean back in surprise.
"Those world hewers are battle temples. We're going to sacrifice them all. That's a big Mandarin battleship. We haven't encountered one of those yet in combat."
Admiral Vincent mused, then snapped his fingers.
"Presence of planet-killing hardware by a genocidal race? There is precedence for both in that ship and their attacks on the Nimiki."
Admiral Vincent leapt from the bench seat, then pressed a button on his data slate. The entire ship began to buzz with an alarm, and he turned to the men and women around him.
"Battle stations, make preparations to drop."
"Hang on, kid. We're coming,"
Sergeant Taskins said, pulling his headset around as everyone scattered.
"It's going to be a few hours, but just hang in there, all right?"
Harrow turned off all his lights as another pair of Corsairs went thundering past, and he huddled under his gaming desk.
"Hurry, please. I can hear the screams."
Freren growled as she slapped her helmet on. She had just started a new movie with Rayburn, and then they were suddenly racing off on an emergency skip and having to get every pod ready. "What is even going on?" Freren asked on all the comms as she clambered into a yak. 3 humans and 2 Yorpals quickly climbing in with her. Sergeant Mackey was the first to respond.
Mandarin have landed on Wandero, and they have one of their battleships hovering over. We take care of the raiders. Flyboys, take care of the ship.
Another day in the fucking office then, Freren muttered, and the ship gave a subtle lurch as they exited their ship. It was a fast skip, as Wandero wasn't very far, but enough time had still passed for the Rowan to suffer at the hands of the Mandarin. The new drop bay was huge, allowing an entire company to be dropped at once, including the Yaks and Higgins 3s at the same time. Fighters are already deploying, someone said over the all-comms, and that made everyone get goosebumps. If the fighters were being deployed already, then the Mandarins were extremely close. All Higgins and Yaks loaded. All personnel accounted for. No personnel found in the drop bay. Drop bay venting for launch. The dockmaster said, her voice even-toned as it usually was. Be advised, all pods will be dropping through the dogfight. Through the dogfight? A Yorpal said, turning to look at Freren as the air was sucked into the ship before the rest was purged by the drop doors opening. We are going to be dropped through the fighters? Freren matched the confused look of the other Yorpal, then looked back forwards, eyes wide. Well, that's a new one. Unlocking drop pods for launch, the dockmaster said, and Freren could hear the yak once again spooling up and putting power into the dampeners. The noise was deafening when all the yaks spooled up, and Freren's own yak was vibrating from the engines of the Higgins 3s. They were all then levered into position, dangling out of the drop bays like a cloud of metal bats. Freren opened a display to the outside, and she sucked in a short breath. Hundreds of fighters and bombers danced and streaked in the dark above the planet. Bright flashes of light, signaling the end of a fighter or bomber, sparkled everywhere, and she could also see the looming shadows of destroyers detaching from the big-mouth bass. Showing green from all percepts, engaging launching cables. All the Yaks and Higgins 3s were brought under tension, and Freren quickly wiggled the chewable mouthguard into place. It was pineapple-flavored, and she was not a fan. All pods ready. Go for air, boss, the dockmaster said, and everyone within their pods braced themselves. All of Third Company was launched along the rails in a hissing wave of steel, the Yaks screaming ahead of the heavier Higgins 3s with the glittering of light off their armor. Freren was used to this by now, and looked forward to it frankly. The rush was something she could get nowhere else. Even the noise of the Yak's warning klaxon was enough to get her blood pumping at this point. All pods launched in the green, brace for thunder, and take their souls, the dockmaster said, and even she was watching through monitors as the pods screamed towards the surface of Wandero. Freren's pod was buffeting back and forth as usual, but a loud boom caused them all to shake and rattle within the compensator harnesses, and the yak was letting out a short, clippy klaxon of warning. What the hell was that? Freren yelled out as the yak began to twist and yaw, and the dockmaster entered her ear. You went through, Mandarin bomber. You're going off course, she said into Freren's ear. You'll be landing some ways away from the unit. Prepare to be on the move as soon as you land. You mean if we land? Freren shouted back at her, and she felt the yak start to spin. The yak was now a litany of noise, a chorus of growling klaxons and ringing warning bells. We're hit! Came an all-comms call, and Freren quickly blinked open a video display. Mandarin bombers had managed to land a missile on a Higgins 3, and it was tumbling through space while trailing both oxygen and glittering fragments of metal. The human fighters swarmed around the drop pods now, rotary cannons spewing glowing lines of death as tracers lit up the inky void of space above the planet. We're losing air! The pilot called out again, but it was cut short as two more Mandarin missiles made contact. The entire Higgins 3 erupted with a brief flash of light. Troopers, cargo, metal, and parts of the drop pod were thrown out into space in a spray, and Freren's stomach dropped. Get SAR out there! Someone called over the link as the fighters engaged in a feverish pitch of aggression, carving a path through the Mandarin for the search and rescue craft, desperately trying to take in any floating troopers they could see were still alive. The drop timer came on for Fraren's own wobbling yak, and she looked around to the other troopers around her. "Get ready! This is going to hurt." Harrow was watching through his window, listening to the fighting below. When the drop pod screeched through the neighboring building with a boom, he fell to the carpet, covering his head out of instinct as the pod slammed into the concrete below in the middle of the gunfight. The building gave a low groan but held steady, bricks and concrete trailing down through the sky like the broken teeth of a giant that lost a fistfight.
Holy shit,
Rowan said in English, then scrambled up to the window as the pod gave a clanging hiss. "Go, go, go!" Freren howled as she tumbled out of the yak, rolling along the steel onto the ground and firing the entire way. Their yak had come down at an angle, and she had to unfortunately deal with gravity more than the others. Her rolling fire caught the Mandarin raiders off guard, as they had been busy fighting a private security element of the Rowan. Their weapons were cheap Gauss-Tech rifles from the Yorpal, and they were feeling the weight of its lack of penetration. Freren rolled onto her feet in a squat, her tail brushing against the ground with a swish as her humans and Yorpal came around her to flank, firing on the move.
Why are they here?
A Mandarin raider spat out over the clamor, firing her rifle on the move and watching with anger as the crystal shattered against the heavy armor.
Rowan aren't a part of the Confederation!
Fucking humans! Another Mandarin howled, then started firing his own weapon at Freren and her troopers.
They don't know how to leave shit alone!
A usual issue, their crystal-based weapons cut through shields and projectors alike, but failed to fully penetrate old-fashioned human hard armor. Freren always enjoyed this part, walking through the screeching crystal fire while hammering away with her XC-1 Lancer. There may have only been 6 troopers, but they cut through 20 raiders like butter. Freren turned to look at the Rowan private security, then pointed her bladed hand at them. "Where are the rest?"
"All over!"
the Rowan called out, slamming a fresh power pack into his Gauss carbine.
"We've been fighting them for hours now! They just don't end! We've lost nearly all of our ground forces! Our vehicles didn't even last an hour!"
Freren blinked at the menus on her helmet display, then found Sergeant Mackey. "Sergeant, we've landed, but we're 10 miles away from you. Cleared out some Mandarin from a residential area."
"Get down!"
a Yorpal shouted, tackling Freren to the ground as a Mandarin war vehicle rounded the corner. Everyone took to cover as the barrel of the hover tank hummed, then discharged a hot blue pulse of light, blowing the yak to pieces and sending it skittering across the concrete road. "Armor!" Freren screamed at Sergeant Mackey as she and everyone else dove for cover. "Mandarin hover armor!"
"Stand by,"
Sergeant Mackey said calmly, even as he was currently in the middle of his own gunfight. Mandarin hover armor was an odd creature, as they were low and squat, yet hovered around 2 feet from the ground. They had a turret built of angled armor, and their sensor suites looked like a pair of eyes on the turret itself. Ominously, they gave a faint pulse of light every 5 seconds, the only tell of their shields. The hover tank pulsed along the roadway as Mandarin infantry piled behind it, then fired again, blowing a huge chunk out of the roadway where a Rowan mine was hastily set up. Freren and her men all got up and ran to hardier cover by a water fountain, dodging the crystal munitions of the infantry all the while.
"Bomber en route! Stay behind cover!"
Sergeant Mackey said to Freren, even as she was hugging the bum of a Rowan statue. "Yeah, I'll do that!" Freren barked back as the hover tank gave another report, cleaving away half of the fountain and raining both water and stone onto the troopers surrounding it. The Rowan security forces tried to open up on the infantry as they got close, peeking out from behind their own cover by the building. Freren turned her head in time to watch them all be turned to red mists of dust, blown to pieces by a direct hit from the cannon. "Ah, shit!" one of her humans said, the female human hugging the ground as hard as she could.
"Where did their armor come from?"
"We were supposed to come down with the 3s. They have the anti-armor."
Another human yelled out, leaning up to fire quick bursts at the Mandarin before ducking back down. The hover tank fired again, and more of the Rowan were blown away, though there were survivors this time. A female Rowan called out for aid in her native language, her legs caught under a large chunk of concrete as she fired randomly at the Mandarin. One of her fellow Rowan tried to grab her, but quickly caught 3 rounds of crystal to the chest, falling down dead into the road with a whack of skull against concrete.
Damn it!
Frerin hissed, then scrambled up from the ground into a run, hauling ass across the street. Crystal sang and shrieked around her, one round catching her in the shoulder armor and causing her to stumble, but she came down next to the woman. As she hefted the concrete with the aid of her micromotors, she realized the 2 other Yorpal had come with her and were laying down covering fire at the advanced infantry. "Grab her!" Frerin yelled, her muscles bulging with the effort. "Grab her! Grab her! Grab her!" One of the Yorpal grabbed the Rowan by the arm and jerked her out, after which Frerin let go of the concrete with a crash. 2 crystal rounds impacted her chest plate, carrying her backwards. Frerin stumbled and hit the ground as the 2 other Yorpals carried the Rowan to cover, but was back up on her feet after a single breath. She raised her rifle and fired, carrying the line of rounds along the infantry and making them scatter. Frerin heard the hum of the hover tank's barrel, and she pinned her ears against her helmet as the barrel swiveled towards her.
Oh man, are you for real?
Not willing to go down easily, she raised her rifle, firing at the tank. She even strode forwards, reloading her rifle to keep firing at the damned thing. She had been taught at the Standing Stones that those who followed Tyr did not go quietly and died with their weapon in their hand facing the enemy. If she was going to die, she would be dying on those terms in order to appease Tyr and not dishonor her fellow Kauai Yorpal. Oddly enough, Frerin gave the tank pause. The barrel stared at her for a moment as she emptied her 3rd magazine into it. But it began to hum with energy, preparing to turn this arrogant Yorpal to stardust.
"You may want to get down,"
came a male voice into her helmet, and Frerin obeyed, falling down to the ground like her strings had been cut. Frerin looked up to see the Boeing IZ-10 zip overhead, its 4 engines glowing blue and red and swallow wings, leaving trails of white vapor in its wake. The anti-armor missile hit the Mandarin hover tank like a small child getting wanged with a baseball bat, and the explosion lifted Frerin from the ground.
Holy fuck!
Frerin howled as the shockwave of both the missiles and the detonation of the tank carried her backwards, rolling and thudding along the concrete like a paper doll in a windstorm. She slid on her front chest plate for 20 feet before coming to a rest in a full starfish, and her helmet was giving her all kinds of warning beeps about that one.
"Tank gone?"
Sergeant Mackey asked into her ear.
Uh-huh,
Frerin said, still a bit jumbled from the multiple rolls.
"Good. Back to work you go then,"
Sergeant Mackey said. Frerin puffed out an angry retort of air, then shakily got back up onto her feet as she was juiced with painkillers. She looked over to the 2 Yorpals, the several Rowan that they had picked up, and the 3 humans all looking at her.
What?
Frerin asked them, dropping her magazine and putting in a fresh one as she started walking.
We got work to do.
Come on. The Battle of Wanderel was one for the books. Not only did the big-mouthed bass, along with the multiple destroyers that had been attached to her, obliterate the Mandarin world hewer, but it was the first armor-on-armor battle of the war. The regs of the 7th Infantry got the first Mandarin vehicle kill, beating the bomber by 14 seconds and beat the actual war wave by 32 seconds. Anti-armor scout APCs of the 13th Armored gained the first vehicle-to-vehicle kill of the conflict, having been transported down aboard an experimental armor drop Higgins 3. Sadly, the waylaid Higgins 3 was in a rough spot for rescue, and by the time fighters had cleared the area, only 13 of the 50 men on board were able to be rescued. The rest suffocating inside their armor or dying to the exposure of space. Several Higgins 3s had been hit by fighters and bombers on the way down, but thankfully, only one was lost completely. The fighting continued for several more days, the Mandarin being systematically tracked, found, and destroyed by human infantry and vehicles. Those on the ground were not done, even as the last Mandarin lay dead or taken as prisoner, as the wreckage of the World Hewer pounded the planet for days. Rescue operations were carried out in full by all personnel, digging out Rowan survivors from fallen buildings or tracking them down as they hid out in their forests and mountains. Even the human civilian coffee baristas got in on the action, setting up small stalls and handing out free Joe to the Rowans. As the bodies were counted, Command realized that the Mandarin were hoping to take the planet, so prisoners were pried open by force to spill their secrets. According to the Mandarin, this planet's sacrifice was to facilitate prayers of power to those on the front line fighting the war wave. They had thought the area empty of ships able to contend with the World Hewer, and had assumed that the Big Mouth Bass was in fact a space station, judging by the readouts. Everyone on board had a good chuckle at that. While the devastation was great, the humans had arrived quickly enough, thanks to the intercession of humans playing with the Rowan, Harrow. Harrow's knowledge of the English language and having made fast friends with American gamers had saved his planet, as well as sparing the remaining 77% of the planet's inhabitants. If it had not been for Harrow, the planet would have been killed to the last and used to feed the Mandarin's eclectic powers. The battle had been fast and fierce and cut short due to the detonation qualities of the Mandarin armor. When a tank was critically hit, it went up in a massive explosion of energy, and it did a good job of clear-cutting Mandarin infantry who were too close. The Mandarin believed that their own energy shields would make child's play of human armor munitions, but it appeared that was not to be the case. Sure, it could stop the sabot rounds and explosives, but a jet of molten metal from shaped cone? That was a surprise for them. The leaders of the Rowans were quick to recognize a mercy when it was given, as they knew that the humans had no reason to come help them. They could not afford the fees that gave such services. The Cinderal Confederation, while annoyed at the rescue being done for free like it was for the Nimicky, turned a blind eye to it. They knew better than to try and chastise the beast they were currently wielding, and knew that it was more likely for it to bite them for being heartless. If the humans wanted to play hero, so be it. At least the Warhound was happy. News of the battle spread far and wide, and the Rowan, being as prideful as they were, offered themselves as tribute. In the rights of the Rowan, they were technically offering themselves to subjugation, as they had nothing else to give. Rowan leadership was more than certain that the humans would absorb them like a meal, devouring the planet and taking it while doing the same to its people. It was a fair trade in their opinion. They were alive, after all, thanks to the human warriors in green. What surprised the Rowan was that not only did the Big Mouth Bass loiter in their space, but it also supplied the planet with crate upon crate of weapons, something called an M16, as well as completely refitting the planet's arsenal. Rowan leadership was alarmed.
"We cannot afford this,"
one of them had exclaimed during a meeting, the bright gold Rowan sweating bullets.
"We don't have the credits."
A human military ambassador had just scoffed. "Oh, please, these are relics. You're doing us a favor by just taking them out of our warehouses." A month into their extended stay above Wanderil, they learned of the crushing collision of the war wave against the Mandarin proper, and the fight was escalating by the second. The Rowan learned of this as well, watching the video feeds from the front lines, and their pride could not allow them to sit idly by. They had been too poor to join the Confederation, to properly exercise themselves in the war at large, and had to be rescued by the humans. But they did have one thing in spades, one thing that had been spared by the timely arrival of the human warriors. Shuttles began leaving Wanderil, arriving on the Big Mouth Bass around the clock, and Colonel Shakes was watching the loading bays fill with Rowans as General Greer arrived behind him. "General?" Colonel Shakes said, still looking down into the bay with crossed arms. General Greer walked up beside the man, looking down his nose at the legion of Rowan waiting in tidy rows.
"What is this? Did we set up a meet and greet?"
"No," Colonel Shakes said. "Those are volunteers."
"Volunteers?"
General Greer said, now taking full note of the Rowan below them.
What do you mean, volunteers? I thought the UAS Senate firmly decided to reject the subjugation offer.
Colonel Shakes nodded.
They did, unanimously. But the Rowan aren't taking no for an answer. They are demanding to be taken in and trained. They want to fight and earn back the mercy we showed them.
Oh, come now.
General Greer muttered.
We only lost 80 troopers, KIA, and a handful of fighters. Hell, most of the pilots didn't even die. They just ejected out safely. They don't owe us anything.
Both of them watched as the next shuttle landed, and another 50 Rowan walked out, along with one that both of them recognized.
Harrow?
General Greer said with a smile.
The one the Admiral had talked to over the game.
Colonel Shakes smiled.
In the flesh. Looks like he wants to earn his way too. There are so many,
General Greer muttered.
We don't have enough room on this ship for all of them. Did you call in for shuttle lines?
I did. They'll be here in 10 hours. They were fucking around near the Mars base, so it'll take them a bit.
Colonel Shakes said. Then he placed his hands on his hips.
Well, I guess we'd better get down there and talk to those bananas then. We gotta figure out what they want.
General Greer smirked, turning and singing as he walked towards the door.
Come, Mr. Tallyman, tally me banana.